emphasis is placed on that, but he has had quite a decorated career in many different facets, including environmental sounds, biophony, and it's just an honor to welcome in Bernie Krause to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hello, Jake.
How are you, brother?
Not terrible.
That means okay, good. So
that means terrific.
Good, man. Well, it's really an honor to connect with you, man.
And likewise.
You know, Bernie, I wanted to start by asking you. It's just so funny because I just had a good friend of mine, kind of a spiritual counselor to me in some ways, who went on a 3-year silent retreat in Diamond Mountain here in Arizona, which is out in Bowie. And we were talking about the 3 different types of sounds, and he brought up biophony. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yes.
And that would be the sounds of nature, that what comes out of nature. And we talked recently live on the radio about 2 weeks ago about just the cacophony of noises that was made. I mean, he was on a mountain, and he could hear all the insects, the different types of sounds they would make during the day, when they would come up, when they would come down. And there's 2 other words as well that are escaping me. But I mean, at a certain point, he got so used to it that the wind, he could hear the wind starting to whoosh through the mountain pass, and he could count down the time and know when that wind was going to hit him. But I know I know you've devoted a lot of your passion now lies with environmental sounds, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about how you started on that trip.
Well, actually, it came through the synthesizer and music itself. My late music partner, Paul Beaver, and I were doing an album for Warner Brothers Records called In a Wild Sanctuary. It was the first album ever to be conceived as one about ecology, and also the first album ever to use natural soundscapes as a component of orchestration. So when we decided that was what we were going to do, by the way, it was that decision was partly because of the inspiration of Van Dyke Parks and Randy Newman at Warner Brothers at the time. We were trying to think of a theme for our album, and they said, "Why don't you do it on ecology?" So Paul wouldn't go into the field because that wasn't his cup of tea, and so left the job to me. And just at that time, in the late 1960s, the recording technology was becoming smaller and smaller and much more portable. And with a small Ewer recorder, tape recorder, I went out into the field with a pair of stereo mics and recorded for the first time, in my experience in the field. And as soon as I switched on that recorder, it was just a small park north of San Francisco. And as soon as I switched on that recorder and heard the sound through my earphones, it changed my life. It was so gorgeous and so beautiful, and the sense of space opened up in a way that I'd never heard before. And the delicate fabric of the soundscape. You were talking about the sounds that your friend was hearing on Diamond Mountain.
Right.
Well, the soundscape is divided into 3 basic sources. There's the geological source, which we call geophony, geo meaning earth and phone from the Greek meaning sound.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the natural sounds that occur in any wild place, like he was talking about the wind, the effect of wind in the trees or grasses, or down mountain passes and so on, water in a stream, waves at the ocean shore, that kind of thing. And there's also the biophony, bio meaning life, so sounds of living organisms that occur in any given habitat collectively. And then there's the third, which is generated by us, called the anthropophony. Anthropo, like in anthropology, meaning human. Excuse me. And so all of these 3 sources combined are what we experience in our life in terms of the soundscape. All of the sounds that we hear come from any one of those 3 sources, or all of them together. And so Paul and I went out and recorded these sounds. We did the album, And I decided that was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, because it made me feel so good, physically and emotionally, that these sounds and the soundscapes, that there was no question about what I wanted to do. And at some point, about 10 years later, after that album came out in 1979, I quit a very successful music career and went back to school, got my PhD in bioacoustics, and have been recording in the field ever since.
Can you be more specific? Well, number one, what was the name of the park? And then number two, specifically, what were the soundscapes that you were hearing that first time that really just put you at peace?
Well, the name of the park was Muir Woods, just in Marin County, just north of San Francisco. And the sounds that I heard were very delicate, because what I didn't realize when I went out for the first time was that I was going out in the fall, in October of 1968. And during the fall, after all the birds have flown south and pretty much evacuated the area except for the resident birds, there were very few around, just a few crows, ravens, a few blue jays, some juncos, dark-headed juncos and stuff. But for the most part, there weren't many birds around. So the fabric was the bioacoustic part of that fabric was very light, but still it was that sense of space that got me. I wanted to record in more spacious environments. I also wanted to work outside. I didn't want to be inside a studio anymore, and I'd spent pretty much all my college days and after college in recording studios or in buildings. And I really wanted to be outside working with animals. I didn't, and I just, in '79, I had been fired 8 times by Coppola doing Apocalypse Now, and and got hired back. Each time I got hired back, I got double the amount of money, so it wasn't serious. And I was hoping I'd get fired 10 more times. That was great.
Well, can I ask you a question about that? I mean, I got to ask you a question because, were you working at different First Studios on that one? Where were you? I mean, because I was working at another studio. I was working at Coppola's Zoetrope Studios here in San Francisco. Because there were so many people that had their hands in the cookie jar on that one. I did not realize that you also played a role in the Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, there as a matter of fact, there were a lot of people. There were actually 5 synthesists on that session, and each contributed, a fair amount of work.
Right. It's one thing that is just phenomenal. I was just sort of going through my notes this morning, and so many of the cats that I talked to could have been Dr. John from New Orleans, or could have been Ramsey Lewis from Chicago, or cats out of Boston or New York, or even the different sounds, the different regional sounds that were coming out of different parts of our country. And I look at it and I say, you really were at the choice points of several different major regional sounds. And I wanted to start in Detroit. You grew up there. Did you cross paths? Did you ever go to Cass Tech? Did you ever cross paths with all the jazzers that were there? I know you were playing guitar at the time.
No, I didn't. I studied with classical guitar with Joe Fava, and jazz and pop occasionally with Joe Messina. Joe Messina was one of the studio guitarists for Motown. And that was where I got my, where I learned my music. And when I applied to music school, I applied to Juilliard and Eastman and also to Michigan. I was told in 1955 when I applied that guitar was not a musical instrument. So I wasn't able to study music with guitar as my major instrument. And I refused to, go to any other. So, like I say, I worked my way through school playing guitar, and when I finished Michigan in 1960, I came out east to Boston joined the. I was at MIT at the time, and also working part-time at a music. What do you call it? A concert management team. We managed people like Joan Baez and Flatt and Scruggs, a lot of the blues people, and so on. And we put on the Weavers concert in 1962 at MIT, and I boycotted the Weavers concert because I didn't think that they were progressive enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I was singing in a club, and I was a local club in Cambridge, and one of the Weavers came by after the concert, and I was doing this set of really stupid satirical things on Weaver songs, and the guy burst out laughing. He said, "Okay, wise guy, how's about we're auditioning for the Pete Seeger slot, and why don't you send us in a tape?" So I sent in a tape, not taking it very seriously, and lo and behold, I got called in for a final audition and won the spot, and replaced Seeger. The Seeger slot. Nobody replaces Pete Seeger, but I had the Seeger slot for the last year the Weavers were together, introducing the song Guantanamera. And then came out to California after the Weavers broke up in January of '64. Went to Mills College, studied electronic music with Pauline Oliveras and Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, and that was another game changer for me, because I decided that I was making very little money playing studio guitar, because there was a lot of competition on guitar and none on synthesizer.
Did you, going back to Detroit, though, before you left, I realized you got some formal education from different teachers, but can you talk inherently about the fact that, there's so many of the cats that I talked to, the jazzers, there were no jazz curriculums. Many of the instruments, were not, unless they were in a classical setting, they just looked at you and said, no, there's nothing available. But could you talk about the most indigenous experience that you had, maybe witnessing street music? Was there a pocket of Detroit where there were, I know in Chicago there was Market Street where you had a lot of blind dobro players. I'm just talking about the indigenous quality and how music was made in the street as opposed to academia when you were coming up.
I didn't get into that really until I got into Michigan. So while I was in Detroit, I lived in kind of a bubble in a very, middle-class neighborhood, and we didn't venture out a lot. It just wasn't the thing that we did in the 1940s and 50s.
Right.
So there was a club called the Keynote, and it was a jazz club not far from where we lived. And a bunch of us young kids used to hang out at the Keynote when, and we used to hang out at the back door. And when the bouncer, when the friendly bouncer was working, he would crack the door a little bit, and we'd be able to hear the sets that were being done. Eric Dolphy and so on. And that was about as close as I got to really, hearing other kinds of music. Although I did have a lot of recordings. I mean, we had really good friends who loved jazz and brought by, some of the greatest recordings of '78, certainly of the time that were out there. And we had a chance to listen to that stuff. But the live stuff was really hard to get to.
I mean, I guess my question, I talked to cats from Chicago, like Barry Goldberg, Michael Bloomfield, on the they would hear it on the radio, and then they had to seek it. They knew they wanted to seek it, and they wanted to they had to go find it. And so they went and found their heroes. And I'm just curious as to whether you just were oblivious to it or whether you just were not going to go into those, if you knew about it and just it was not going to happen, you were not going to go into those sections of town.
I sort of knew about it peripherally, but it wasn't that I wasn't going to go into those sections of town. I wasn't afraid of that. That wasn't an issue.
Right.
The issue was that the cultural and social bubble that we lived in, there just wasn't that kind of curiosity or interest in an outside world that was outside of our normal routine. And so it wasn't really, it wasn't discouraged, but it wasn't encouraged either.
Right.
It was sort of dismissed.
Yeah, so it sounds like from a younger cat, it sounds like my family. but when you got to Ann Arbor, can you talk about an indigenous musical experience that impacted you?
Oh, sure. That changed really quickly because I began to take, not only was African music and Cuban music very much a part of the scene in Ann Arbor at the time. I mean, there wasn't a day that I wasn't hanging out with some group or going to some concert to hear different kinds of music. And I took ethnomusicology when I was in school, so I had some background that way as well. I mean, we had a wonderful teacher who was a guy. I can't remember the guy's name now, but he was a wonderful teacher and turned us on to all kinds of stuff from Africa and from Latin America, and even as far off as some of the Moash recordings from Papua New Guinea and stuff like that. So we had a pretty good background after that.
Well,
It didn't take me very long to pick it up.
I mean, what was so nice about your generation is that, there was a lot of competition, but, like you said, you had, I guess you were thriving on the Ethnic Folkways records a lot?
Pretty much.
And I mean, then can you talk about the sort of the ethnic music? I mean, would there be jam sessions that you would go to? I guess what I'm trying to say is you knew at a certain point that you had good rhythm, you had good training, but, did you get a chance to go and see any of these, the black arts ensembles, these experimental African jazz groups that were really, trying to consistently transcend every time they played music, if they weren't getting off and they weren't doing their job? I just wanted to know if there was, because Michigan was Detroit and Ann Arbor, when you were there, was just a hotbed of real progressive music.
Well, in Ann Arbor, I was hanging out there all the time, like I said. And when I got to New York after Ann Arbor and Boston, it was always that kind of music that I gravitated to, and play, and occasionally would sit in with the groups.
Like with who?
Oh, geez, with Lightning Hopkins, with we're talking about the serious blues guys, though, with Jesse Fuller.
Wow.
Because we managed him.
I love this. No, this is what I want. Go ahead.
He used to stay at my apartment, and we'd hang out and play together. So, I mean, I learned what I could from major people playing at the time.
What I guess, talking to Bernie Krause here specifically, you have people now. You go out, you go out to a bar. They're going to play a blues band, and immediately people think of a blues scale, But Lightning Hopkins, Reverend Gary Davis, Fred McDowell, all these cats.
Gary Davis, and geez, I can't remember the guy's name.
It'll come back. No, I want to get it'll come. But those guys were singing about their experiences. I just wanted you to talk about the blues that you learned about from those guys, because it's very different.
Well, I just learned how to play. I couldn't live their experience, and I didn't live their experience. I wasn't from the South, and when Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee would come in and stay at my place, or I would stay with them, I really didn't have that experience, and it wasn't. I lived the experience kind of peripherally through the music, but I didn't really. I wouldn't presume to say I got it. I just played. I learned to play it. I learned to do it fairly well. But I wasn't really a part of that scene.
Did it help you with your feet to feel the music?
Yes, of course it did.
Because I guess what I'm saying. I mean, I'm being born in '78. I caught the tail end of human music, but we live in such a digital age now, the age of digitization, that you look at cats that are playing instruments, and they they might sound just like somebody. They might have monster chops. Their technique
Yeah.
might be great, but it's about you guys had great feel, and so yeah.
But I was never really a top of the line guitarist. I was a good guitarist. I was okay. I could read. I just didn't. For some reason or other, I didn't have the chops and never really made it as a guitarist. I was a good studio musician. I could play all the styles, but I never really gravitated to that. I didn't really get into music until I got into synthesizer. And when I got into synthesizer, then things changed. Well, then I was able to do things that I couldn't do before, even though I wasn't a keyboard player.
But just for the record, what sessions did you play? Who was running Motown at that time? And because people think of Motown and they hear Benny Benjamin and James Jamerson and a whole bunch of cats. But
well, remember, this was the 1950s, and when I came into play, when I would cover for Joe Messina, and it was just a few times, I can't even count the times, and I didn't even really think about it, because this is the way that it looked at the time. Berry Gordy would come in from the Ford line that he was working on, and he converted a two-car garage into a recording studio. He had an Ampex 3-track in one corner, and catter corner to that was a microphone. And he sat there with earphones recording on the Ampex recorder, and somebody would sing or play whatever the instruments were in the microphone. I don't even. I worked, I think, with little Stevie Wonder, Martha. I think we did some dates on Martha and the Vandellas, early Martha.
Beautiful.
Sam Cooke. But I really don't remember. I never really met them because we were tracking.
But I mean, you're okay saying that you don't know definitively if your rhythm tracks are on any of the Vandal stuff, or for a fact.
No, I never paid much attention to it. I get paid $5 a night.
Right, and there was no at that point people. I mean, I just talked to Lou Donaldson, and he just talked about cats like Grant Green, other people, like they just take Blue Note would take advantage of these cats because they were so strung out they wouldn't even know what they were owed or not. So I'm just, yeah. I mean, the onus was really not on, I mean, clearly you were not getting credits on the back of the albums or anything along those lines, but you did wind up on, I mean, it says you wound up recording for Motown.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. And I worked again with Motown in the 1960s briefly after the Weavers broke up in 1964. With a fellow by the name of Booker Bradshaw, who was, one of the people who worked at Motown as not only as a singer and performer, but I think he had also some kind of capacity in the corporation itself. So yeah. I mean, it wasn't a part of my life that I took very seriously. It was just something that I was able to pick up a few bucks at Michigan because I needed to also work for a living if I wanted to have some extra money.
Looking back on it, does it almost seem surreal that it happened?
Yeah, I mean, it's surreal only in that I get questions like this about things in my past that are 50, 60 years ago that I can barely remember, that had no impression on me then, and it's almost as if I have to kind of make something up to fill the answer.
Right. It's interesting. And no, it's that's fine. I mean, I think part of it is just the idea of creating new history and promoting the elasticity within the music scene. And I think that that's important. Just to touch on Boston, I mean, were you playing the Club 47? Were you running?
Yeah.
Did you have a jug band of your own?
No, I didn't have a jug band. I was always a solo.
Did you cross paths with the Jim Kweskin jug band? I mean, that place.
Oh, sure. We were all part of that same scene. Only I was never strictly a folkie because I was always folding in jazz licks and stuff like that that weren't traditional 3-chord music. and that upset a lot of people because I wasn't, quote, ethnic enough.
Could you talk about a time when you threw in some jazz licks and you know, people were maybe trying to push you out of your comfort zone, but you kind of just went with it because you knew that's what you were feeling?
That's what I felt. That's what I wanted to do. And so when after the Weavers broke up, for instance, I sang with a woman by the name of Bonnie Dobson. Bonnie Dobson was a Canadian gal who went to New York and had some success. She did a song called "Take Me for a Walk in the Morning Dew." That was her big hit.
It's a big song.
Yeah, and so we sang together for a while after the Weavers broke up. And what we were doing was kind of a Jackie and Roy crawl of folk music, folk music.
Right.
That's the kind of harmony we were after. That's the kind of stuff. It was kind of a cross between Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross, and Jackie and Roy, only folk music. And people hated it. They hated our guts. They hated what we were doing. And on top of that,
how do you know? Wait, the musicians or the parishioners?
The musicians, in particular.
How did you know they didn't like it?
Because they told us. they were not shy about
right.
Criticizing other people. It was a very competitive world then, as it is now. And the other problem that Bonnie and I had was Bonnie's dad was head of the Communist Party in Canada, and I had been with the Weavers. And before we joined I joined the Weavers. During my school days, I was also occasionally on the Today Show with Dave Garroway at NBC. So I'd fly in to New York. I sang with this gal from school, which is another story. And at one point, they asked us to sign a loyalty oath, which said, in effect, we'd never seen a communist, we wouldn't know what a communist looks like, and we swear our oath to the United States. Well, only a few people had to sign those papers, and folk musicians among them, but not everybody signed them. So when I found out that not everybody signed it on the set, I waited till the last minute, and then they weren't doing tape delays then, as the 1950s, and I waited till the last minute on the set, and I had the loyalty oath in my hand, and just before, like 10 seconds before we were supposed to go on the air, I tore it up. And so I was blacklisted from television until 1973. I couldn't get on television. So Bonnie and I couldn't get on Hootenanny or any of the folk shows. We were blacklisted. We couldn't get on Smothers Brothers. We couldn't get on any of the shows. So that was the other reason that we didn't get, we didn't get any standing on television.
Well, we have a game on this program called Name That Tune. I'd like to play this piece of music for you, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Okay.
music on the Jake Feinberg Show, brought to you in part by Abbott Taylor Jewelers, the Circle Tree Ranch, and the Jewish Community Center of Southern Arizona, and we thank them for their support. All right, Mr. Krause, what do you got for us, brother?
In terms of what?
What is that?
You want me to identify that tune?
Please.
That was a long time ago. What is it, Piece 3?
Well, I just you know the album, because I can't get it. I can't get the track listings up right now.
Yeah, it's the Nonesuch Guide to Electronic Music, I think.
You got it, and that, and I consider myself anytime I see reissues on Turnabout or Angel, I get rid of them. But Nonesuch, Counterpoint Esoteric, and I take pride in Nonesuch, and I have never ever seen this album, and I am jonesing to get a copy of this. And I want to know, in your mind, did you know? That's the wrong question. What were your expectations going in making this album? What did you want to come out of this album with?
Well, we had no idea, because nothing like this had ever been done before. The Nonesuch Guide to Electronic Music was recorded in 1967, came out in 1968. And it was an album that was really it was really the first piece ever written about how to work with an analog synthesizer. And so it was a demonstration album, in effect, and it had a booklet in it that talked about electronics and electronic music and how to synthesize sound. And how to create sounds out of the different kind of oscillators that were then available and filters that were then available on analog synthesizers. And it didn't matter what kind of synthesizer it was. And we showed how to do electronic notation and so on. So the album was conceived really by Jack Holzman. He was the president of Elektra Records in Nonesuch at the time. And we were flying from Los Angeles to Santa Barbara. From Los Angeles to Monterey to attend the Monterey Pops Festival in 1967, where Paul and I had a Moog booth, and we were demonstrating the Moog synthesizer. And so while we were on the plane, Jack said, I said to Holzman, I said, I've been learning the synthesizer from Paul, and I've been recording all of our sessions. And he said, well, why don't you make a transcript of those recordings and do an album based on, use that transcript as the narrative for the written part of the guide, and you guys come up with some examples of sound, and I'll give you a $2,000 advance.
I love it.
So
of course.
He gave us a $2,000 advance. We couldn't get any traction in Hollywood in terms of playing synthesizer with anyone, because nobody wanted to do that at the time. And so we were definitely going broke. So I took Holzman up on the deal. The problem was the album ended up being on the charts for 26 weeks, on the classical charts and Billboard. And we never saw even a royalty statement, and haven't to this day. And the album, has been a standard reference in synthesis from that time on. It's almost 50 years now.
Again, the cruelty and the unfairness of life and the music industry at the time, we could vet that. Now we could vet that till the end of time. I want to know what this booth looked like at the Monterey Pop Festival, and who were some of the cats that came up and you opened their mind to this thing. Well,
Paul and I had tried for almost a year to get some standing in Hollywood with the synthesizer, and we couldn't get anything going. And so finally, with our last $300, we had spent, each of us had contributed half of our life savings to buy one. They cost $15,000 at the time. And we went around to over 100 record companies, got rejected by every single one of them. Can you play the questions? We got questions like, can you play Monday Monday on the synthesizer? That was the.
They wanted you to play pop tunes on the synth.
Yeah, can you do that? Yeah, sure we can. We can do anything you want. But the upshot was that they ended up not taking. Nobody wanted to take the risk. So when we got to Monterey Pops, everybody, all of the every record company in the world was there, and these major companies, the producers and head of A&R, all these major companies were there with multiple contracts in their pocket. And so anytime a group performed, they all jumped up on the stage, backstage, and offered these groups, as they came off the stage, these huge amounts of money. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars, literally. And so every major group that I can think of who showed up at that festival at that time and performed. And many of them came back to where our booth was. Our booth was just a table with a synthesizer on it and a speaker below. That was it. There wasn't anything much to talk about. And people would come skulking in their costumes or whatever it was they were wearing. And many of the groups newly signed were flush with a lot of money. The Monkees, the Doors, the Frank Zappa. I can't even remember most of them. And they, many of them bought the synthesizer. I don't know how many we sold. I think it's probably around 10 or 12. And we had a third. We got a third commission from Moog for that. So but that wasn't the problem. The problem was that when the groups finally got delivery on these synthesizers, most of them were too stoned to play it.
Right. They didn't know how to do it.
Well, they didn't know how to do it, and we would show up at their house or a studio, and the synthesizer hadn't even been taken out of the shipping carton. What
happened? With Manzarek, for instance, with the Doors, can you take me through? Were they one of the groups where it was just still in the box?
No, the Doors didn't actually. As I recall, the Doors didn't actually buy a synthesizer. The Doors bought modules, and they put the modules in the rack of the studios, the equipment racks of the studios, and used modules like filters to filter some of their work. Like on Strange Days, for instance, we worked on Strange Days, and but it was more of an academic thing rather than a musical thing. It was more an engineering thing.
Sure. Can you? I mean, how? So obviously there'd be a level of frustration. You walk into a place and to a band's house, and they were all, lit up, and the thing hadn't been taken out. How then did you find a way to get that thing into a live group musical setting? Because that to me would be insulting is the wrong word, but
well, it was almost never live. It was always we were always tracking, and so
was it? Can you talk about anything? What was live? Was there? Can you talk about one live time when you did play live in the studio?
I can't even remember. Well, we played live once at a Monday evening concert at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. It was a concert with where Michael Tilson Thomas was playing keyboard, and there was not a full orchestra, but a small orchestra there.
Wow!
So we played live with that. And the only other time I ever played live was a New Year's Eve concert with the Tubes.
What year was that?
God, it had to be 1970s something. I can't remember what it was.
Okay, but I mean, I think this is just important because a lot of people's my ego would get involved if the instrument I was pioneering had not even been taken out of the case and there was disinterest. And I would like you to talk.
Well, we always brought our own instrument there. We never played their instruments because we didn't know whether or not they worked.
Right. So how? So talk about. Yeah. I mean, how did you come into a setting like that, and then how did you open people's eyes to what the Moog could do?
Well, if we had a session, we would just show up at the session. Our instruments were set up at the sessions, moved from session to session by a moving company, actually, and then set up, and we would come in, and they would run a track by us and say, we want. Here's even more insulting. We want that Stevie Wonder sound, or we want the thing you did with Barbra Streisand, or we want the thing you did with this person or that person. And so we'd end up replicating ourselves all the time. Speaking of insult, I mean, if your ego was involved in that kind of work, then you'd be really depressed. But Paul and I considered it work, and we were getting paid double scale to do these things. We just went in and did our work and left and went home. The only outlet that we really had was our own albums.
Oh, exactly. I mean, I just, so you were getting good bread and supporting your families and that, but do you feel do you feel like it became something of an afterthought? People saying, Bernie and Paul. I mean, what I'm saying is I'm leading, I just, to me, the way you were treated by George Harrison seems to me to say that it was already well known in the industry that you could get away with this stuff. If that's wrong, then tell me so.
Well, I wouldn't. It wasn't industry wide. It was selective people who did foolish stuff.
A lot of heavy cats, though. These are not like random people.
No, but he's a person.
That's right.
He does what every other person does.
He's just a man. That's right. Yep.
Yeah, and not a very nice one, as far as I could tell. But there were. I mean, many people were terrific to work with.
Right.
Mick Jagger was terrific to work with, and a really good person to hang around with. Bright, articulate, literate, and funny, quite funny. But and great fun to work with as well, and to be involved with. So that it ran the gamut. I mean, and you get that in any industry that you're in. That wasn't the problem. The problem was for the most part, the egos were so great and the rewards so little, and money after a while becomes pretty dull in terms of what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And after the Circus Maximus with Apocalypse Now, I just decided I hadn't completely enough. I didn't ever want to do that again. And so I went back to school, got my Ph.D. in bioacoustics, and I've been working there ever since.
Oh, that's great. No, I mean,
and until very recently, I have to tell you, Jake, I hadn't given a thought to synthesizers, but it's just coming up on the 50th anniversary of the Moog synthesizer, and all of a sudden, everybody is asking me questions about it, and I hardly remember any of this stuff. I worked on 250 sessions. I worked on 135 film scores.
And then you got some random 38-year-old radio host asking you about these, completely,
I don't think about my past very much.
Well, no, I mean, but it's true. But it's just the thing that you need to understand is that you whether or not you paid attention to it or were not interested in it or other things were consuming you, the richness of the musical period that you came up in. I mean, ironically, you decided to drop out at the time when right around the Reagan era, which is the motto came in. I got mine. How come you don't have yours? So you kind of bounced out at the right time. But I mean, you really came in. Again, I'd like to be humbled in the sense that the ego was so strong, and like you said, the money after a while, you can only do so much with the money. I just want to talk to you about, I mean, you were not at Mills College, there was a lot of experimentation going on. Did you go out I want to know if you went out when you got there and asked to put on some kind of, electronic music show with lights or dancers? What was the most avant-garde thing as a student that you tried to put on live, and did you pull it off?
I never performed live because the synthesizers, for one thing, the Buchla synthesizer that was at Mills College was always failing. An oscillator didn't work, or the spring reverb didn't work, or the filter didn't work. Something didn't work with the Buchla at any given time that I would be there. So it was there was no chance in hell I was going to try to perform live. with that instrument. And anyway, it was stationary, and it was mostly in the studio. So it wasn't until I met Paul Beaver, who was introduced to us by Jack Holzman, the fellow that I mentioned earlier. It wasn't until I met Paul Beaver and we got a Moog synthesizer that we actually thought about performing live. As a matter of fact, Bill Graham came to us and wanted to manage us. But we were not, we were doing so well with studio work that we really didn't want to travel. And we certainly didn't want to travel with a huge synthesizer or two of them.
What was, so, I mean, because this is classic, because, I mean, I just interviewed Emilio Castillo from the Tower of Power, and he said everybody and their mother wanted to get onto the San Francisco Fillmore label, and there you got, Beaver and Krause saying we want nothing to do with it.
No, it wasn't that. It's that we didn't feel that the technology was good enough so that it would support the kinds of work that we wanted to do live.
What would be the ideal work you would do live if you could?
Well, I don't know, because we never got past that question of whether or not we wanted to perform. So, and we didn't have any drive to do that. We were a studio group, and all of our stuff was created in the studio. The things that we created in the studio, we could never do live, and because it just wasn't possible to do that. The few live performances that we did, like for instance, you opened this hour with a piece from our album Gandharva with Michael Bloomfield on guitar.
Mm-hmm.
That album, the second half of that album was done at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco with Jerry Mulligan and Bud Shank, Howard Roberts, and jazz people like that, with Paul on the 5-manual organ, and I was on synthesizer. And that was the only live performance that we ever did, and that was recorded. That was a live performance.
That was, I'm sorry.
It was also, by the way, the first 4-channel discrete album ever recorded.
Yeah, okay. So who played drums on that? Was that Lee Charlton or George Marsh?
Both, I think.
You had double drums in that Grace Cathedral?
No, we had different. We had no drums in Grace Cathedral.
So Bud Shank and Mulligan, there was no trap set for that?
No trap set. There was a harp player by the name of Gail Lawton,
mm-hmm.
and Gail, he played 2 concert harps set at 90-degree angles at the same time.
This is awesome.
Tell me about it. Imagine how to pedal those things.
Oh my God!
Harps have pedals so that they can change the strings on them, and that guy was busy. So there was 2 harps and me on synthesizer, and that was it. And there was Howard Roberts on guitar. Oh, by the way, what I wanted to say is Gail Lawton was the guy who used to play the harp for Harpo Marx movies. He's the guy who dubbed the harp for the Harpo Marx movies, and he was 16 at the time. He taught Harpo Marx how to play. Little known fact.
No, I mean, it's so great because, I mean, those, but right now I know that a place that I have a huge amount of store credit at has both Wild Sanctuary and Gandharva, and the writing on the back is it's not clear as to what is live and who's on what track. There's just a lot of accomplished players on it. But did you guys walk out of there? Were you satisfied with that performance? I mean, looking back,
the Grace Cathedral performance,
mm-hmm, yeah,
was gorgeous. It was a wonderful moment. The only problem technically was that the 16-track recorder that we were recording on had a burned-out bearing, and it was slowing up as the night progressed, so that when we went into remix, we had to use a variable speed oscillator to control the speed of the tape as the tape ran, so that it could stay in pitch. which was a pretty interesting exercise. But it was the first 4-channel recording that was discrete. What we had the players do, Bud Shank and Jerry Mulligan, what we had them do is walk through the cathedral where we had microphones set up throughout the space, and they actually walked through the cathedral as they were playing. Grace Cathedral, by the way, is the top of Nob Hill in San Francisco. It's a huge church.
Yeah, no, it's a great. I mean, there's tremendous. A lot must have great acoustics because I know Garaldi and Kyle Jader both recorded out of there as well. I wanted to just ask you. So interesting. I had no idea that she was on faculty there, but I wanted you to talk about Pauline Oliveras' significance to the musical movement of the '60s when you got out to San Francisco.
Well, she was very much in the avant-garde, and she was doing experiments with electronic music and early experiments with her accordion and so on. And she was truly wonderful. I was probably more in the derriere garde than the avant, but certainly she was very influential in my life. Her lesson on the synthesizer with me was she walked in the room and I said, I don't know how to make this thing work. And she said, just remember that outputs go to inputs. And she walked out the door, and that was my synthesizer lesson for Pauline. I guess it's a metaphor for life, too.
No, I think that was also the style. Jackie Byard. I mean, you'd have cats coming in to get lessons with Jackie Byard. He'd be playing drums, they'd be playing piano, even though everyone knows him as a piano player, he was a great drummer. And he'd have them say, okay, I want you to play this song in all 12 keys. And when they fell apart, he'd said, okay, now you know what you need to work on. I'll see you next week. You know, I mean, just a lot less verbal leadership. I just think there was a lot, and again, because it was very new technology and was just evolving in that time, she just knew there wasn't a whole lot she could really give you. But I just didn't know she was on the map at that point. I mean, I know she's still doing heavy stuff today. Got another piece of music here for Mr. Bernie Krause, and we'll come back and break it down. All right, Mr. Krause, what do you got for us, brother?
I think it's from an album called Ragnarok. I'm not sure.
Your spot for somebody who has literally almost forgotten all of his work on the synthesizer. That was called Ragnarok Electric Funk, and the name of that tune is called "As I Hear It."
As I Hear It.
And how did you?
I haven't heard that album in 50 years.
Yeah, well, this is a piece. This was just a segment of that song that was put onto YouTube. I haven't seen that album. I've never seen that album on vinyl. I just wanted
some of these albums, by the way, Jake. Some of these albums are worth a lot of money if you can find them.
Believe me, man. I know they are. You know, I mean,
one of my books just sold that's out of print. Has just sold for $300. It's more money than I ever saw from it.
I love it. Did you? I just wanted you to talk a little bit about your concept of love and how you bring love to people, and just your concept of love.
Wow, what a question. I don't know any other way to act. I don't know any other way to be. This work that I do comes from a place of love. My hope is that people are going to feel that when they hear it or see it. Right now, I'm taking the science aspect of what I do and converting it into music again. I've come really full circle. I'm working with a fellow out of the UK by the name of Richard Blackford, the composer in residence at Oxford. And Richard and I have composed a symphony based on natural soundscapes. It's called the Great Animal Orchestra Symphony for Orchestra and Wild Soundscapes,
wow.
which has just had its premiere in the U.S., both in Ohio this past summer, and also at the Walton Arts Center in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We're hoping that it's going to get some major performances with major symphonies as well. And it's a piece that's completely devoted to a sense of love and a wonder of the natural world. And it's with a 70-piece orchestra, by the way. It's a live animal sounds with orchestra. It's really pretty interesting. And the first symphony orchestra ever to use natural sounds as a component of orchestration live. And then we just did a ballet with the Alonzo King Lines Ballet in San Francisco. They're an international San Francisco group, or they're based in San Francisco, and they perform all over the world. And we did a thing called Biophony with them, which just premiered this past April, and also in the East at a place called Jacob's Pillow. And, if you guys have any performance center down in Tucson,
yeah.
That's a piece you want to invite Alonzo King to do, because it is fascinating. It's going to be in Paris, not in 16, but in 17 at the Palais de Chaillot in Paris. It's going to be performed there, and it's going to be performed also in Europe, I think, this year as well.
Why is it fascinating to you?
Well, it's fascinating to me because we're finally getting the kind of outreach to people that we need to do here in the U.S. in particular, because environmental issues and global warming and things like that are just not high on people's lists of concerns.
Mm-hmm.
And these works of art and pieces bring home the message loud and clear that we have no time to waste.
I mean, in the sense that, can you be a little more specific? I mean, is it somewhat of a cryptic kind of thing? I mean, or what do you mean by that?
No, it's not cryptic at all. There's nothing that I do that's cryptic.
No, but I mean, like, how do you convey that there's very little, that there's no time within those pieces?
Do you hear how beautiful this stuff is? How these how the life around us is crying out for survival and help, and what are we willing to do about it? Are we just going to stand around and let it go, or are we going to start caring?
The ecology part of it, I mean, you've been on this trip for a long time. It's never been really fundamentally in the front of the consciousness of the American people for 50 years or so. I mean, so.
No, but what's interesting, Jake, is that it's interesting you say that, because in Europe, people are literate, they read, they understand, they know what the issues are, and they're dealing with it. They're actually doing something. They're proactive about it. Here, nobody cares, and or nobody seems to care enough to really take a stand and get this thing off the ground, get the idea off the ground, get the momentum going for proactivism in the face of losing all these organisms and life around us. That really has a great impact on our lives. For instance, the basic reason that I got into this wasn't because I wanted to do science or write symphonies. The reason I got into it was because I have a terrible case of ADHD.
Me too.
I've had it since the time I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I have it as an adult, and it's really, really difficult for me to get my my bearings a lot. I used to take a lot of medication. I take no medication now. If I feel that I'm under stress or I can't find my way during the course of a day, I hightail it off into the field, and I just sit there and listen to natural sounds, and that makes all the difference for me. It's actually served as an analgesic. It's pretty much mitigated all of the issues that I had around the ADHD that I used to suffer with.
Well, we're going to wrap up part one with Bernie Krause on that note. That's beautiful. I have to kind of maybe put that into my own life. But Bernie, we just kind of scratched the surface here. It was a light set one, and this is going to air on Saturday. This Saturday, I'll make sure I'll get you a link to it.
Excellent.
But I really wanted to thank you. You're an accomplished musician and a phenomenal human being, and we need more cats like you who are pushing the natural soundscapes against the callousness and digitization of our, and bottom line monetization too. Of course, it's
yep.
Right. So
You know that.
So great, Hangman, and we'll be in touch. Okay.
Thanks. Have a good one.
All right. We'll see you all in a little bit. This is the Jake
Bye-bye.
Feinberg Show. Take care.